On January 9th, 1923, the Times was granted exclusive press access to the tomb of King Tut, kicking off what became known as Tutmania. With all eyes on Egypt, it's no surprise that the press leans into the mysterious aspects of the tomb's discovery, such as the mysterious deaths of several of the archaeologists on site. Was it the mummy's curse? Stick around as we learn about the discovery of King Tut's tomb this week in history on the Wiki Review. Welcome to Wiki Review, where each week I explore a Wikipedia article about a historical event that happened this week in history. I explore it with you in a fun and conversational way, review sources to assess the article's credibility, and finish by spinning the roulette wheel to pick next week's topic. If you haven't already, like and subscribe. I'm Kaylee, and stick around as we dive into the Wiki Review. The discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun. The tomb at Tutankhamun was discovered in the Valley of the Kings in 1922 by excavators led by Egyptologist Howard Carter, more than 3,300 years after Tutankhamun's death and burial. Whereas the tombs of most pharaohs were plundered by grave robbers in ancient times, Tutankhamun's tomb was hidden by debris for most of his existence and therefore not extensively robbed. It thus became the only near-intact royal burial from ancient Egypt. Now, I want to take a look at this citation. It's citations number 1 and 2, but I am going to go ahead and continue reading for a little while before we get back to this, because what I have noticed that's very interesting is these are the only 2 citations for the entire introduction of this section, and I want to check that out. But first, let's finish the section. Now, the tomb was opened at the beginning on November the 4th, 1922, during an excavation by Carter and his patron, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. Ooh, we're going to have some trouble with that name. Carnarvon. All right, his name's Carnarvon. Sorry, Sir Carnarvon. All right. The burial consisted of more than 5,000 objects, many of which were in a highly fragile state, so conserving the burial goods for removal from the tomb required an unprecedented effort. The opulence of the burial goods inspired a media frenzy and popularized ancient Egyptian-inspired designs within the Western public. Now, to the Egyptians, who had recently become particularly independent of British rule, the tomb had become a symbol of national pride, strengthening Pharaohsism. Gosh, there are so many terms already in this introduction that are hard to pronounce, so bear with me, audience. It is called Pharaohsism, a national ideology that emphasized modern Egypt's ties to the ancient civilization and creating friction between Egyptians and the British-led excavation team. The publicity surrounded by the excavation intensified when Carnarvon died of an infection, giving rise to speculation that his death and other misfortunes connected with the tomb and were the result of an ancient curse. After Carnarvon's death, tensions arose between Carter and the Egyptian government over who should control access to the tomb, and early 1924, Carter stopped work in protest, beginning a dispute that lasted until the end of the year. Under the agreement that resolved the dispute, the artifacts from the tomb would not be divided between the government and the dig's sponsors, as was standard practice in previous Egyptological digs, and most of the tomb's contents went to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Side note, I hear that the new Egyptian Museum in Cairo that has been built to actually show off King Tut's treasures has recently opened, and it's on my top number 1 place to visit in the world right now is that museum. Oh my gosh. Anyway, in later seasons, media attention waned, apart from coverage of the removal of Tutankhamun's mummy from its coffin in 1925. The last of the burial goods were conserved and shipped to Cairo in 1932. The tomb's discovery did not reveal as much about the history of Tutankhamun's time as Egyptologists had initially hoped, but it estimated the length of his reign and gave clues about the end of Amarna period, which presented his reign. It was more informative about the material culture of Tutankhamun's life, demonstrating what a complete royal burial was like, and providing evidence about the lifestyles of wealthy Egyptians and the behavior of ancient tomb robbers. The interest generated by the final situated efforts to train Egyptians in Egyptology. Since the discovery, the Egyptian government has capitalized on its enduring fame by using excavations of the burial goods for purposes of fundraising and diplomacy, and Tutankhamun has become a symbol of ancient Egypt itself. Now, out of all of that I just read, that entire introduction, there are only two sources, and that was at the very first paragraph of this entire thing. And I have to say that this is a big chunk of text, especially a very important chunk of text right at the beginning. And not having more than two citations there is quite worrying. And also, these two citations, they're right next to each other, and they are literally quoting the same thing. So let's take a look and see what these citations go to. All right, so let's take a look at source number 1 right here. It is the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun over 100 years later from Daily Art Magazine by Maya Tola. Let me see. Let's pull this up on the screen right here. Okay, it looks like a nicely designed website. Look, I'm not going to say that this website is bad. These are definitely some high quality photographs here. But I get the feeling that you could definitely find a better source than a random internet magazine. Though I will say this looks like a very high quality magazine. And it does look like it has a lot of things on Egyptian art. But if it were me, I would not use this in academic resource paper. I don't necessarily think it's inaccurate. I just think that there's probably better options out there. And then if we take a look down here, we have Tutankhamun Guide and Facts About the Boy King of Ancient Egypt by Joyce Tildesley. A lot of these names, man. This is also from the same date, which I gotta say the date is great, December 28th, 2024. Looking at that one, this is also an internet magazine, but is an official website of BBC History magazine. So, I mean, a little bit pop culture-y, but yeah, the BBC is they're a good source for things. I can't say it's a best source. Again, if I was doing some actual academic research, I probably would not choose this particular source, especially whenever, I mean, look, the first thing that they have up here, for those of you who are on YouTube, you can see it, but those of you who are just listening, it literally starts with, when was Tutankhamun born? We don't have any record of Tutankhamun's birth. And I mean, this is very basic information right here. I get the feeling maybe these articles were used because I mentioned earlier the new museum in Cairo has opened up, and so there has been a lot of press releases about that. So perhaps that's why some of these sources are magazines. But again, I don't think that these are the best academic resources to use. You could probably find something better from an academic journal if you're going to be conducting research on this topic. And furthermore, I'm not a big fan of how Wikipedia only has these two listed as a source for their entire introduction onto this topic. But yeah, that's my assessment. I don't think these are that great of sources. Let's continue. The pharaoh Tutankhamun ruled between the 18th dynasty during the New Kingdom. He died circa 1323 BC and was entombed in the Valley of the Kings near Thebes, modern Luxor, like most New Kingdom rulers. Instead of a full-size royal tomb cut into the slopes of the valley, he was interred in a small tomb dug into the valley floor, probably a private tomb that was modified to fit the large amount of goods that accompanied a royal burial. The tomb was robbed twice soon after its construction. Officials restored and resealed it, filling the entrance passage with chips of limestone to deter further intrusion. And during the reigns of Ramses V and Ramses VI, nearly 2 centuries after Tutankhamun's death, his tomb was covered by debris from construction of tomb KV9. Tutankhamun's tomb was thus hidden from later waves of robbery so that, unlike the other tombs in the valley, it retained most of the goods that it was stocked with. Now, Carter, the archaeologist who eventually is the one who ends up finding the tomb, Carter had come to Egypt as an artist, assisting and recording Egyptian tomb art, and he was then trained as an archaeologist. As inspector, Carter both restored and protected the open tombs in the valley and sought to dig for undiscovered tombs. In searching for a patron to fund these efforts, he found Theodore M. Davis, a wealthy American who regularly visited Egypt. With Davis's support, Carter made several small finds and cleared 3 previously unexplored tombs. Now, little was known about King Tut in Davis's time, though he was known to have restored traditional practices in the monarchy after a brief episode of radical innovation known as the Amarna period. It was thus likely that he was buried in the Valley of the Kings, the traditional site for royal burials before and after the Amarna period. Davis never found Tutankhamun's tomb, assuming no tomb would have been cut into the valley floor, but he did find signs that the king had been buried within the valley. One such sign was a pit discovered in 1907 and designated KV54, which contained a handful of objects bearing Tutankhamun's name. Another was an uninscribed tomb found in 1909, and it was known as KV58, that contained pieces of chariot harness bearing Tutankhamun's name and that of his successor I. Davis concluded that KV58 was all that remained of Tutankhamun's burial, which would mean that virtually all the king's tombs expected to exist in the valley were accounted for. The last years of Davis's work in the valley produced almost no finds. In 1912, he even wrote, "I fear the Valley of the Tombs is now exhausted." My gosh, was he wrong. Well, Carter left the Antiquities Service in 1905 after a group of French tourists forced their way into a closed archaeological site at Saqqara. He ordered the Egyptian guards to eject them. The use of force by Egyptians against Egyptians caused a scandal, and it led to his resignation. He subsequently worked as an excavator for George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, a collector of Egyptian antiquities at several sites in Egypt. Carnarvon bought the succession for the Valley of the Kings when Davis relinquished it in 1914, and although the First World War made it difficult to conduct field work in 1917, Carter began to clear the valley down to the bedrock. Now, during these excavations, the political status of Egypt changed drastically. The Egyptian revolution. The word I'm looking for is revolution. The Egyptian Revolution of 1919 convinced British authorities that Egypt's current status was unsustainable, and they issued the Unilateral Declaration of Egyptian Independence in February 1922. It left the UK with substantial influence over the government, particularly in military and foreign affairs. Antiquities policy was one of the areas ceded to the Egyptians. The Antiquities Service retained its incumbent director, Pierce Lacour, but he was now answered to the Egyptian Minister of Public Works. And the season for excavation, just so you know, and tourism in Egypt extends from November to April, avoiding the worst of the country's heat. Now, I could imagine that, because that would be, gosh, could you imagine doing that excavation in the middle of the desert in July? That would be, oh, what a nightmare. Now on to the discovery during the first season. To minimize the disruption to tourists, Carter and his Egyptian workforce began on November the 1st, 1922, earlier in the season than usual. On the 4th of November, a worker uncovered a step in the rock, and according to Carter's published account, the workmen discovered the step while digging beneath the remains of the huts, and other accounts attribute the discovery to a boy digging outside his assigned work area. Now, I have a citation here that I would like to take a look at. It is citation number 37, and this one also comes with a note. It's note number 2. And I want to see what it has to say about this boy digging outside the assigned work area. Let's check it out. Okay, so over here is number 37. I'm actually going to check out note number 2 first. It hasn't popped up here, but if you actually click that, it will open up the note. And it says, it looks like it's trying to explain about the boy. It says, Carl Kitchener, a reporter of the Boston Globe. I'm having a lot of trouble speaking today, everybody. Wow, I'm losing my mind. But this guy, he's a reporter for the Boston Globe. It wrote in 1924 that a boy named Mohammed Gogar had found the step, and he interviewed Gogar, who did not say whether the story was true. And there's a citation of that. Oh, wow. Do you hear that? There are fireworks going off right outside my recording window. Oh my gosh. I would show you video of it, but you would just get a nice little grainy reflection of all these fireworks. It's just celebrating how wonderful this video is. So let's continue here. It also says that Lee Keddick, the organizer of Carter's American lecture tour, said Carter attributed the discovery to an unnamed boy carrying water for the workmen. Okay, so that's another thing that's attributing it to a boy. And many recent accounts, such as the 2018 book Tutankhamun, Treasures of the Golden Pharaoh by Egyptologist Zahi Hawass, identified the water boy as Hussein Ab el-Rasul, a member of the prominent local family. And Hawass says he heard this story from el-Rasul in person. And another Egyptologist, Christina Riggs, suggests the story may instead be a conflation of Keddick's account, which was widely publicized by the 1978 book Tutankhamun, The Untold Story by Thomas Hoving, with el-Rasul's long-standing claim to have been the boy who was the photographed one wearing Tutankhamun's petricles in 1926. He was wearing Tutankhamun's clothes? If anyone knows what they mean by petricles, Tutankhamun's petricles, please send a message below. There's actually a source for that little statement that I just made. I'm clicking on, and the source goes to Wikipedia. What? No. Okay, it goes to a book with an ISBN number that's listed on Wikipedia. Oh, it's the Tutankhamun Untold Story. Interesting. Okay. All right, now let's go back to the citation number 37. It says Weinstone 2006, page 137 to 138, from the book Howard Carter and the Discovery of the Tomb of Tutankhamun. And I'm going to see if I can find this book online really fast. I'm doing a quick search for those of you who cannot see the screen here on Facebook. Oh, you know what? I think I've seen this book before. Oh, wait, no, that's Howard Carter's book. Oh, my gosh. Okay. Looks like this is it. Howard Carter and the Discovery of the Tomb of Tutankhamun. Is that it? I don't think that's it. Let's go back. It's by someone named Winstone. Yeah, okay, this is it. It presents an incredible discovery of wonderful things made of royal legend, a foreword by someone from the British Museum. Yeah, okay. I would say that this is probably a good source to use in your research paper. It looks like it has some backing of the British Museum and relatives of Elmina, Countess of Carnarvon. Interesting. All right, so I would say that these sources are probably pretty good, and the fact that in that note they were doing a bunch of different sources trying to figure out who the boy actually was, it seems like that has actually been well researched. So I would say that this citation gets a good pass. All right, let's continue. The step proved to be the beginning of the tomb entrance staircase, and at the bottom stood a doorway sealed with limestone and plaster, into which Carter cut a peephole to see the passage beyond, which was filled with rubble. Now, upon closer examination of the doorway seal, it was found to be inscribed with the name Tutankhamun, suggesting that this was his tomb. And the debris was filled, it filled the passage, contained objects bearing the names of other kings, suggesting it might be a cache of miscellaneous objects buried during his reign. The doorway had been particularly demolished before being resealed, indicating an ancient robbery. And on the 26th of November, the excavators reached another sealed doorway. Wow, that's interesting. The doorway was then opened, and Carnarvon asked Carter if he could see anything. Accounts differ as to the wording of Carter's answer in the best-known version in his book. Carter actually replies, yes, wonderful things. Oh gosh, that is so corny and dramatic. There's a citation for this, and I suspect it might be Carter's book, but that is such a corny, yes, wonderful things. That's so silly sounding. Let's check out citation number 46 real fast. Okay, first let's check out this note number 3 next to it. And it says, according to the notes, Carter wrote soon after the discovery, yes, it is wonderful, in an account that Carnarvon wrote for the Times, which, if you'll remember, the Times is the newspaper that has exclusive rights to be able to report on this. And let's see, Carter said there are marvelous objects in here. The more evocative wording in Carter's published account may have been devised by Mace. Yeah, I mean, I will say that certainly sounds like that because that just sounds so contrived. Yes, wonderful things. And it looks like this is citing Frayling, 1992. Let's see, I've gone ahead and looked up this book. It's called The Face of Tutankhamun by Christopher Frayling in 1992. And for those of you who have YouTube access and are not listening on a podcast form, you'll notice on the front of the book, it says on the corner, as seen on TV, which I don't know, maybe this is just some marketing thing from the 1990s, but if someone gave me a book that said, as seen on TV, I automatically assume it's bullshit. So that does not bode well for it. But scrolling out, it does, I mean, it's a legitimate book. The thing is I don't see any, I don't see any like academic relevance to this. Let me see if there's anything inside the book whenever I turn on the pages that could, no. Yeah, I'm not getting much on this. And I did search this before I started recording and I couldn't find a whole lot about this guy either. So honestly, this is another source that, look, it says this as seen on TV. I would choose a different source than this one if I was conducting academic research. Those are my feelings on it. And maybe I'm just jaded because it says as seen on TV. But let's continue on with our story. The gilded furniture and statuary that Carter saw within, first looking into the tomb, stood in a room that came to be known as the antechamber. This room alone contained burial goods in greater quantity than the excavators had ever imagined. Some were types of an object that they were very familiar from previous finds, and some were exceptionally elaborate examples of their kind, and some were entirely unexpected. From the antechamber led two doorways that had been blocked with plaster and then breached by ancient robbers, and one was left open, revealing that the chamber beyond, dubbed the annex, was filled with a chaotic jumble of objects. The other had been resealed in ancient times. Now, many of the objects bore Tutankhamun's name, leaving the excavators no doubt that this was his original burial. Now, the excavators resealed the hole with newer plaster. Through the breach of the doorway became something of an open secret in Egyptology community. Later Egyptologists have differing opinions on the excavators' actions. T.G.H. James, Carter's biographer, argued that entering the burial chambers before the site had been inspected by Egyptian officials of the Antiquities Service did not violate the terms of Carnarvon's concession of the standards of behavior among archaeologists in the 1920s. But Joyce Thrylicity, these names, my gosh, Joyce Tyldesly asserts that it was against the terms of concession and points out that the breach necessitated moving some of the artifacts that stood in front of the partition, meaning their original positions could not be recorded. Mysterious, so maybe the things weren't arranged the way that it was recorded. I mean, we still have them though, so I guess it's fine. It's kind of shitty though. Anyway, clearing the tomb of the artifacts would require an unprecedented effort, and moisture from flash floods in the valley above had periodically seeped into the tomb over the centuries. As a result, alternating periods of humidity and dryness had warped wood, dissolved glue, and caused leather and textiles to decay. Every exposed surface was covered with an unidentified pink film, and Carter later estimated that without intensive restoration efforts, only a tenth of the burial goods would have survived being transported to Cairo. Oh my gosh. Now, the tomb inside inspired a public craze, and this came to be known as Tutmania, a specific instance of long-standing phenomenon of Western Egyptomania. As Breasted's son, who the hell is Breasted? Breasted? Oh my god, this guy's name is actually Breasted. 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 Okay, I'm not 12. Breasted. As Breasted's son Charles put it, and who is this guy? Like, I see nothing about him. It doesn't matter. Breasted Sun put it. The news of the discovery broke upon a world sated with post-First War conferences with nothing that proved and nothing that was achieved after a summer journalistically so dull that Egypt... I can't speak today, man. But anyway, apparently the journalism was so dull that an English farmer's report of gooseberries the size of a crab apple achieved the main news pages of the London metropolitan dailies. The resulting media frenzy was unprecedented in the history of Egyptology. Carter and Carnarvon became internationally famous, and Tutankhamun, formerly unknown to the public, became so familiar as to be given the nickname King Tut. And at this point, I think it'd be time for us to take a quick break. So just sit back, listen from a word about our channel and how you can support us, and I'll be back with part 2 in just a moment. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching. As you may know, this is a brand new channel, and your likes and subscribes make a huge difference in helping me grow and get noticed by the famous YouTube algorithm. Now, who knows, maybe with your support, we'll even catch the attention of some sponsors down the road. So, if you like this video so far, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. And if you forgot, I'm your host, Kaylee. I was conducting PhD research at Vrije University Amsterdam before moving to YouTube, but I'm also a professional visual and performing artist. You can actually see some of my artwork here up on the screen, and several of my original works are actually for sale on my Etsy store. I have some on the screen that you can take a look at, but I would rather you to go check it out on Etsy. I've got a variety of original paintings, handmade jewelry, and prints available, and it's a great way to bring a little bit of art into your life. The link to my Etsy store is in the description and below. You can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/wikireviewweekly. And thanks again for being here. Like and subscribe to this channel, and let's continue. All right, continuing onward. Tourists in Luxor abandoned their normal sightseeing itinerary and flocked to the tomb, crowding around the retaining wall that surrounded the pit in which the tomb entrance lay. At times, the excavators feared that the wall might collapse from the weight of the people leaning on it, and when possible, the excavators left objects uncovered when carrying them out of the entrance to please sightseers. People who demanded to enter the tomb, many of whom were too highly positioned or well connected to refuse, presented a greater difficulty. Every visit to the tomb by a non-archaeologist increased the risk of damage to the burial goods and disrupted the excavator's work schedule. Carter and Mace estimated that a quarter of the work time during the first season was given over to accommodating such visitors. The phenomenon extended far beyond the tomb itself. Guests at the Winter Palace Hotel in Luxor danced to the Tutankhamun rag, and in the United States, the discovery inspired a flurry of ephemeral Egypt-themed films and more enduring a hit song called Old King Tut. Interest in Egyptology and sales of books across ancient Egypt also surged, and several established Egyptologists published books about Tutankhamun to capitalize on the trend. Really fast, I want to check on citation number 79. It's in regards to the Tutankhamun rag, because this is something I've never heard of before. So let's just click on number 79 and see what 79 is all about. Okay, the Tutankhamun rag up here on screen, citation 79. No way. You won't believe this. The citation is for the Christopher Frayling, The Face of Tutankhamun book from 1992 that I just did in the last citation. No, I'm not a big fan of that book. I mean, maybe it has a lot of information that maybe I'm just a fool, and I'm not seeing the academic value of his work. I mean, I'm sure that there is academic value in it, but can't we find something else besides a book that says as seen on TV? I'm not a fan of that. I'm really not a fan of the sources on this one. Yeah, let's continue on with our story. Not a fan of that at all. All right, well, the opulence of Tutankhamun's burial goods in particular caught the public's attention. Replicas of them appeared as early as 1924 when the British Empire exhibition featured a reproduction of the tomb, though many of the contents could not be included as they had not yet been seen by the excavators. The public in Europe and the United States compared the everyday items in the tomb to modern household goods, and producers of clothing, jewelry, furniture, and household decor hastened to create Egyptian inspired designs. Some were based on actual artifacts found in the tomb, and others simply adopted ancient Egyptian names and motifs. Even Egyptian revival decorative arts that had existed since the early 19th century had largely been aimed at a world of wealthy art connoisseurs, but the production of Tutamania was mass produced and marketed to the public. In the 19th century, Egyptians had little interest in ancient Egyptian civilization, and in the early 20th century, that attitude changed, largely because of Ahmad Kamal, one of the first Egyptian Egyptologists who raised public awareness of ancient Egyptian history. In the years leading up to the First World War, Egyptian nationalists began treating ancient Egypt as a source of national identity, one that bound together Egypt's Muslims and Coptic Christians and emphasized that Egypt had once been powerful and independent. This ideology, known as Pharaohism, was well established by the time of the 1919 revolution. The Western mania for ancient Egypt had inspired modern Egyptians to adopt it as a source of national pride, and Tutankhamun, in particular, became a national symbol once Tutmania emerged. After the discovery, ancient imagery became unambiguous in Egyptian print media, and ancient Egypt became a common subject for Egyptian plays and novels. Major Egyptian literary figures such as the poet Ahmed Shawqi focused on pharaonistic themes in the wake of the discovery, and the first Egyptian film made in 1923 was titled In the Country of Tutankhamun. Now, Carnarvon embraced the publicity, hoping to defray the cost of the excavation by licensing rights to the media. And on the 9th of January 1923, the reason why it is featured here in week 2 of 2025, he signed a contract with the Times, granting its reporter Arthur Merton exclusive press access to the tomb. Now, other Egyptological digs had made similar arrangements with newspapers in the past, but the unique nature of Tutankhamun of this find, well, it made this one a major source of conflict. A coalition of other press outlets criticized the Times' monopoly on official information from the excavation, and their coverage of Carnarvon grew increasingly negative. Egyptian papers joined the international press in denouncing the monopoly, which they saw as a sign of continued foreign domination. At the same time, the Pharaohist authors expressed fear that the tomb would be a subject to the division of the finds, sending many of the burial goods out of the country. An editorial in Al-Amran, written by Fikri Abaza, declared Lord Kavran is exploiting the mortal remains of our ancient fathers before our eyes, and he fails to give the grandchildren any information about their forefathers. And now we get to the death of Carnarvon and the curse of Tutankhamun, the mystery that has been gripping us since the beginning of the episode. The antechamber was almost entirely cleared by mid-February, and on February the 16th, Carter and Carnarvon formally opened the burial chamber with government officials in attendance. At the east end of the burial chamber was an open doorway to a fourth room, dubbed the Treasury. It contained the canoptic chest that housed Tutankhamun's embalmed organs, and Carter had the entrance to this chamber boarded up so it would not be a distraction during the upcoming clearance of the burial chamber. It was only reopened in 1927. After a viewing period for the press and the general public, the tomb was closed for the season on the 26th of February. As in each subsequent season, a large temporary workforce of local workmen were recruited to rebury the tomb entrance to prevent intrusion, while the objects that had been conserved were packed up for workmen to propel by the hand along a length of Deckerville railway track. The limited length of the available track had to be constantly taken up and relayed to cover the distance down to the Nile, where the artifacts were shipped to Cairo. That sounds so inefficient, oh my gosh. Well, shortly after the tomb closed, Carnarvon accidentally cut open a mosquito bite on his cheek while shaving. Oh, poor baby. The wound became infected, and after weeks of illness, culminating in blood poisoning and pneumonia, he died on April the 5th. Carnarvon had been in frail health for 20 years, but his death soon attracted speculation that something more than infectious disease was at work. Works of fiction in which Egypt's spirits of the reanimated mummies exact revenge upon those who disturbed their tombs first appeared in the late 19th century. This fiction trope came to be known as the mummy's curse, or the curse of the pharaohs. The real-life stories of Walter Ingram, who died in 1888 after purchasing an Egyptian mummy, and of a coffin lid called the Unlucky Mummy, which was purported to cause a variety of misinformation, cemented the idea of the curse in the public imagination. Now, the pre-existing concept was applied to Carnarvon's death. Now, several people, such as the author Marie Corelli and psychic, God, please, the psychic known as Chiaro, claimed to have warned Carnarvon in the moral peril before his death. Gosh, psychics, oh please, that's such silly stuff there. But no, it's a mystery. Arthur Weigel, a former Egyptologist who is now the Daily Mail correspondent in the tomb, said he had observed Carnarvon joking as he entered the tomb and remarked, "If he goes down in that spirit, I give him 6 weeks to live." In later accounts, such as the recollections of anthropologist Henry Field, claimed that an ancient text wishing death upon visitors of the tomb was inscribed over its doorway or on an object within. No written curse has ever been documented in Tutankhamun's tomb, and although some Egyptian tombs did contain such curses, most are from non-royal tombs that predate the Tutankhamun by centuries. Now, any deaths or unusual events connected with the tomb were treated as possible results of the curse. Carnarvon's son and heir, Henry Hubert VI, Earl of Carnarvon, said that Cairo suffered a power outage at the moment of his father's death, and in England, his father's dog let out a howl and died. Now, another such story recounted by Carter and others involved in the excavation involved a canary that Carter had bought at the beginning of the digging season. Initially, the Egyptian workmen regarded the bird as a sign of good luck, and when the tomb was discovered, they dubbed it the Tomb of the Bird. Now, when a cobra entered Carter's house and ate the canary, the Egyptians called it an ill omen, relating that intruding animal to the uraeus, the protective cobra emblem on the brow of Tutankhamun's statues. And when George J. Gould, who had visited the tomb, died the following May, his death was attributed to the curse as well, as was that of Aubrey Herbert, Carnarvon's half-brother, in September. Later additions to that list of perpetually cursed deaths included those of Mace in 1928, Carnarvon's secretary, Richard Bethel, in 1929, and Weigel in 1934. Now, most Egyptologists dismiss such claims. In subsequent decades, some sources, such as the author Philip Vandenberg, suggested natural explanations for the fatalities, such as poison's presence in the tomb. I mean, it was sealed up for, thousands of years. Who knows what type of mold might have been growing in there, man? I'm just saying. But there was a study in the British Medical Journal in 2002 that found no significant difference in morality between those who had entered the tomb and those who had not. And this, my friends, is citation number 131. So let's see what the British Medical Journal has to say. All right, we're looking at the 2002 British Medical Journal, number 131 by Nelson in 2002. There we go. And, oh wow. Okay, this is definitely an actual medical journal. It's in the Mummy's Curse Historical Cohort Study. The objective, it actually has an abstract to examine survival of individuals exposed to the Mummy's Curse, repeatedly associated with the opening of the tomb and Tutankhamun and Luxor. All right, it's a cohort study. 45 Westerners identified by Howard Carter. Okay. Wow. This is a very legitimate journal. And quite honestly, between this and the episode on the Emancipation Proclamation, which was week 1's episode, the first episode I ever created, so far, this is the best source that I have come about to be used for an academic research article. This is definitely one that I would include this in my academic research if for some reason I was examining, deaths of the mummy's curse, which is highly unlikely. But yeah, this is a great source. Let's continue on. Now, Egyptian writers picked up the trope of the curse and adapted it to their own purposes. Al Ahram published humorous stories in which Tutankhamun awoke from death to comment on the politics of the day. That sounds hilarious. I really love that idea. And more serious works of fiction depicted mummies confronting the Westerners who disturbed their tombs, although in a more benign manner than in the Western stories on the same theme. These stories portrayed mummies not as objects of horror, but as national ancestors seeking to redress the treatment of Egypt and its heritage by foreign powers. Now, between digging seasons, Carter and Mace wrote the first volume of The Tomb of Tutankhamun, their account of the discovery and the work that had been done thus far, and it was published in October as Carter headed back to Egypt to resume work. With Carnarvon's death, the tomb clearance would be financed by Carnarvon's widow, Almina Herbert, Countess of Carnarvon, but with Carter now the spokesman of the government and the press. Now, friction increased between the excavators and the Antiquity Service as Carter sought to strictly limit visitors to the tomb. Lacour required as Antiquities Service inspector on the site, demanded that Carter submit a list of all personnel for governmental approval. And Lacour mentioned that the divisions of fines in a 10th of January 1924 letter to Carter raised a topic that excavators had previously avoided. In 1922, Lacour had declared the end of the traditional half share given to excavators. The governments might grant artifacts to the sponsors of an excavation as gifts, but all antiquities in Egypt belonged in principle to the government. This change did not apply to Carnarvon's existing concession, which allowed for a diversion of fines except in case of an intact tomb whose contents must be surrendered entirely to the Antiquities Service. Carnarvon had planned to argue that Tutankhamun's tomb did not qualify as intact because it had been robbed, even though it was restored and resealed in ancient times. And Lacour now implied that all the tomb's contents were property of the Egyptian government, meaning no division of fines would take place. And now, King Tut's discovery's legacy. When the tomb was discovered, Egyptologists hoped it might contain documents that would clarify the history of the period in which Tutankhamun lived. No such documents were found, but the artifacts did provide clues. The dates on the wine jars from the tomb established that Tutankhamun had not reigned much longer than 9 years. Egyptologists had previously assumed his only claim to the throne was through his marriage to his queen, who I'm going to butcher this name, Ankhesenamun, and perhaps that he had been an elderly courtier. Yet, the examination of the mummy revealed that he was between the ages of 17 and 22 at death, and the unusual shape of his skull resembled that of an unidentified royal mummy from the KV-55 tomb, suggesting that he was related to it and was thus of royal blood himself. Some artworks from the tomb are in the style of the Amarna period, and some refer to the Aten, the deity worshipped in that period, indicating the return to orthodoxy during Tutankhamun's reign as gradual. Much of the tomb's historic value was in burial goods, which included sumptuous examples of ancient Egyptian decorative arts and enhanced the understanding of material culture of the New Kingdom, and primarily how royalty lived. Many of the clothes from the tomb, for example, are far more varied and embellished than the clothes portrayed in art from Tutankhamun's time. The tomb also provided exceptional evidence about tomb robbery and other restoration efforts because the presence of most of the burial goods made it possible to partially reconstruct what was stolen and what was restored. The discovery also affected Egyptology in a different way. Together with Egypt's newfound partial independence, the enthusiasm surrounding Tutankhamun helped simulate the growth of Egyptology. At the time of the discovery, very few Egyptians were trained in archaeology, and those few were looked down upon by European Egyptologists. The first Egyptian university program for Egyptology was established in 1924, and over the course of the decade, a new generation of Egyptian Egyptologists were trained. Although Western public interest in Tutankhamun experienced a lasting lull more than 30 years, it was revived after the Egyptian government began sending the burial goods on international museum exhibitions. The exhibitions began in the early 1960s as a means of encouraging Western support for the relocation of ancient Egyptian monuments that were threatened to be flooded by the construction of the Aswan High Dam. The exhibitions also served other diplomatic functions, helping to improve Egypt's relations with Britain and France after the Suez Crisis in 1956, and with the United States and the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Today, the discovery remains the most famous find in the Valley of the Kings, and Tutankhamun, the best-known ruler of ancient Egypt. The tomb and the treasures are key attractions for Egypt's tourist industry and the sources of pride for the Egyptian public. The Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves writes that thanks to his fame, Tutankhamun has been reborn as Egypt's most famous son to achieve true immortality at last. And that, my friends, is what Wikipedia has to say about the discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb. Taking a look at these sources, I have to say that I was not very impressed with the quality of sources that I saw on this article. With the exception of that very last one that was by the British Medical Journal, that one was highly credible. I would put the sources based out of the 5 that we looked at today, which is just a sample of a lot more sources that are actually on this article. But based on those 5, the fact that it's the 1992 one that's very dated, I didn't see his academic qualifications. Maybe he has them. And the fact that there were large sections, notably the very beginning, the introductory section that only had 2 citations, I would say that I would put this quality of citations of Wikipedia at, I would give it a 4. I was not impressed this time. Tell me what you think. Write in the comments below. Do you think this should have a higher rating for accuracy? Are there parts that could be improved on? I'd love to hear from you all. And let's continue on to the wheel spin, where we can see what type of topic we're going to be covering for next week, week 3 of 2025. Hey, if you like this video or topic, please remember to like and subscribe. And if you saw anything in the Wikipedia article that you think is incorrect, needs editing, or something you just think is cool, write it in the comments below. Now, let's spin the roulette wheel and see what next week's topic is going to be. All right, let's go ahead and throw the wheel up on screen and let's spin it and see what type of topic we're going to be doing next week. Let's go ahead and start the wheel. All right, come on. And we have science. All right, everybody, tune in next week on the Wiki Review, where we will be covering some sort of scientific topic the next week in history. Take care. Thanks so much for watching today. Again, this is a brand new channel, and your likes and subscribes really help me get noticed. I hope to build this channel to a point where it can be monetized and get sponsorships, because doing this sort of thing is really fun, and I'd like to continue. I'd also love for you to check out my Etsy store if you're interested in supporting my work. I have a variety of original paintings, homemade jewelry, and prints for sale. It's a great way to bring a little creativity into your home. So if you had fun today, or you saw something in the Wiki article that maybe someone needs to edit, please comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means the world to me. Until next time, stay inspired, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care! You can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/wikireviewweekly.